This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by Isotope, Native Instruments, Atom Audio, Stealth Chairs, and SAE Institute Nashville. You're hearing my voice right now mixed through Isotope, RX, Ozone, and Neutron on Atom Audio monitors and headphones, all while sitting in a comfortable Stealth chair. Please check out our awesome sponsors using the links in the show notes below, and like and subscribe to our YouTube channel and leave us a comment. It's a great way for you to help support this show. Now get ready to rock. What does it even mean to master an immersive format? How is that different from mastering a stereo format?
There is some talk going on, like what does mastering for Atmos really mean, right? Or for immersive, for spatial, I mean. In many cases right now, what it means is, the mixer is working in a set of headphones, maybe a 5.1 setup, but what does that do in a 12.1 setup or a 7.1.4? What happens when it does get into that other format? So it is more of a QC check on how does this handle across all of, we have a Sonos soundbar with a sub, and so we have lots of systems that we check things on, and we're learning about it as well. So I think there's a lot of that. There are some tools available for adjustment, but it's not as much that we're worried about overall volume.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. Dreaming of a career in audio or the entertainment business? SAE Institute Nashville, in the heart of Music Row, offers hands-on programs where you'll learn on professional-grade gear with industry pros, learning through real projects, not just lectures. Explore studio production, live sound, audio for film, and a whole lot more. Or take the entertainment business program to learn about contracts, promotion, and more. With diploma, associate, and bachelor's programs, there's a path for you. Book a tour today at nashville.sae.edu or call 615-244-5848. Howdy, Rockstars. It's your host, Lid Shaw, and welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Alan Douches, a mastering engineer, CEO, and founder of West Westside Music with over 15,000 mastering credits. Alan has worked with a stunning roster of artists, including Sufjan Stevens, Converge, Mastodon, Chelsea Wolfe, Lucy Dacus, My Chemical Romance, Fall Out Boy, the Dillinger Escape Plan, LCD Soundsystem, and many, many more. 15,000 is a big number. He's been instrumental in defining the sound of independent music, always championing DIY artists, and is now leading the way to bring Atmos production and mastering to indie music. Very cool. Alan is also exploring the cutting edge of blockchain technology with his Web3 startup, which I'm excited to learn more about. This is Alan's second appearance on the podcast. He was previously on episode RSR503. So if you want to go hear his backstory, please check that out. And we spent a lot of time talking about Sufjan Stevens and how he made those records. Thanks very much to Jesse Cannon for making our original introduction. Please welcome Alan Douches to Recording Studio Rockstars. Alan, are you ready to rock yet again?
Yes, my caffeine is filled over here. We're ready to go. Always a pleasure to be here.
Dude, it's great to have you back, man. I went and was, kind of reviewing our last episode since it was years ago. And, it's funny, the things that appear over things that tech is coming at us so fast. So when we did the episode then, AI was, still an idea of like, the singularity and what's going to happen in the future. And when we did our second episode, I literally took your last episode, dumped it into AI. It gave me a summary of what we had talked about so I could remember the topics and everything. And it also pulled some great quotes. And I was like, wow,
awesome.
Pretty amazing.
Awesome.
So it's great to have you back, man. Now you have done a lot of stuff since then, and we got a lot of cool things to talk about. But if you don't mind, maybe give us a little bit of a description about West Westside Music again, and maybe in the context of what's new with your studio and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, we're a full-time mastering facility. At the moment, I'm the primary mastering engineer. I have another mastering engineer in training, but he's mostly doing a lot of private projects. But that's what we're most known for. That's, we got that start almost 30 years ago, and kind of filled a void, which is kind of what's important if you're starting a business, even if it's just yourself or, a couple of guys, is like, what problem are you solving, right? That's what my investors would always say, right? For my blockchain company is like, well, what problem are we solving here? And back then it was.
And where are you guys located?
We're in the Hudson Valley.
Okay.
Pretty much. I don't know if anybody knows where West Point is, but we're literally the next town past West Point, Cornwall.
And is that, so if we think about Manhattan and New York City, is that driving up the Hudson?
Yeah, about 40 miles, just far enough away so that you can get away. But if you need to rush to get in, you can get in. There's a train that comes up to the studio pretty much. And we pick you up at the station and bring you over. It's all good. Yeah.
Sounds great. Can I have my acoustic guitar slung over my back when you pick me up?
It was funny. We moved up here because no one was attending sessions, right? And, whatever it was, I guess about 18 years ago or something like that. And so we were like, nobody's coming to sessions. We were right by the GW Bridge. And so we were like, why are we here? Let's go. So my wife and I had a piece of property that we bought that we were just upstate, that we were just, someday we're going to retire up here, And we just said, let's go. Let's just do that. And then as soon as we moved up here, we started getting more and more attended sessions because I think people just wanted to take a break and have that experience, right? That's the thing about a studio is like, you want to have the experience of being, at a cool place. And so that's what we got. Yeah. It's fun.
For sure. And I mean, New York is a busy, chaotic place. So if you're working with anybody who's in the big city, it probably feels great to just escape it for a minute.
Yeah. And also it's, you got to pick your lane. My lane is really indie music,
Yeah.
So there's no reason to be in the city to have the A&R guys, pouncing in and out and having lunch with them. That's not what we do here, so it's really more about, a band shows up in their van, or something, or they plan it on their tour. Like, hey, we're going to be on tour. Can we stop by and check out the record, So it's cool.
That's awesome. I've always loved the mastering stage of making a record, particularly making records, that's where I started. And now, sure, a lot of projects I do kind of get sent to the mastering and come back through email or whatever. But there was something so wonderful about working so hard on a record, mixing it, doing all this stuff. And then, so your experience is I have to do something. And then for one day you get to go and sit in the back of this amazing studio, which sounds so much better than anywhere else you were working on this thing.
Yeah.
And, sip your great coffee. And you just listen to, a great mastering engineer take it from a good idea to holy shit, that sounds amazing.
Right.
And in like some kind of warp speed fashion. That's how it feels to the rest of us. It feels like you guys have warp speed powers to make stuff sound great sometimes.
Well, we know our room, right? Like, I can't go to another room and really assess something. I could put up some of my reference material or something and maybe make some suggestions, but it's, this is really my third control room that I've been in. And everybody, when they come into one of the new rooms, they're always like, this is the same thing as the last one,
Oh,
like
right. Because you match it, you design it the same.
Little changes, but like it's not broken, don't fix it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the original design was well thought out, took out the physics and the math and did all the stuff to put the bass trapping where it needed to be, et cetera, and so forth. And so, it's kind of just a natural, so.
Well, so before we got rolling, we were, off mic, we were joking about I'm trying to figure out, do I put my reading glasses on or keep them off during this? And then you made a really funny comment about getting your glasses for the first time and the affected head. Yeah,
well, I mean, when I was a kid, I wore glasses when I was in the back of the room of the class, right? You couldn't see, all right, you need glasses. But, always passed my driver's license test without glasses. My eyesight was fine. And after having done this for 28 years or so, staring at a computer monitor, everybody's like, "Your eyes are still okay?" So, they started going, I guess, about a year or two ago, really. And I think I was saying about 8 years ago when I was soldering, you're looking at, is that a cold solder joint? How'd that work? So you put on the $2 reading glasses you get at the local pharmacy, right? You're just like, all right, well, whatever. Nobody's watching me. This is fine. But it started getting to a point. It started getting to a point was just like, you should really get some real proper reading glasses. And so I went for the eye exam, and they were like, well, you should really have, transition lenses and things and stuff.
Yeah.
So I was like, yeah, but I can't wear something in front of my face while I'm working. So, what do you got? So I wound up trying to get the smallest pieces of glass with the smallest, rims and this, just the bare minimum of glasses.
Yeah, you're going all John Lennon on us.
Yeah, well, and then even at that, it took, I don't know, a couple of months to get used to having something somewhat reflective in front of my face, just subtle things. That's
fascinating. Your ears are so attuned to your mastering them that you hear the change of glass in front of your face. So that, to me, that answers a question I didn't even plan to ask, but I recently dialed in my studio. I worked with a designer down here named Carl Tatz, and he came in and did a really wonderful, beautiful job setting up the control room and laser aligning the speakers. And when they do that, the racks on either side of me are cleared off and stuff like that. And then by the time, I'm talking to you now, there's stacks of gear everywhere and all kinds of stuff. And every time I put something up, I'm like, oh, it'll be fine. It's probably not making much of a difference. And so I kind of think you're kind of reminding me that every little thing makes a difference at some stage,
I got to a point when, when the whole band would be in the session, I would really want to do the most work with maybe 2 people max in the room. Even though I could fit 6 or 8 people, that actually changed the sound in the room,
Wow.
So, I mean, again, it's not like, holy shit, he's got unbelievable hearing. It's just, you notice it, right? I mean, you got some other sound absorbing bodies in the room, and, so.
Well, lucky for you, man. Lucky for you. There's no politics involved in selecting 2 out of the 8 members of the band, and who gets to be
singer and drummer. Normally one out, I guess. Yeah.
Well, very cool. So now your studio. So, you've already said that this iteration of the studio is similar to previous ones and stuff. But I believe one of the things mentioned in your bio here was that you've, dived into, is that the right past tense version of that? You've dived into Atmos.
Yeah, immersive. Well,
yeah, so what's that all about for you?
Well, I mean, I've been doing that for decades. 20 years ago, we mixed Mastodon in surround, Between the Buried and Me in surround, Neurosis in surround, but that was 5.1, DVD audio discs, and even before that, I had done post on some projects where they wanted a surround, a typical Dolby mix, wasn't maybe 5.1, it was even just the standard 4-channel, left, center, right, and a 1 rear surround channel. So I've always loved it, and I always fell in love with the concept of the center channel. It's like, you're always fighting to where to put that vocal level, right? And you're half a dB here, it's too much. Center channel, folks, there you go. It's there. They built it for movies.
Yeah.
It's such a brilliant device. And that happened in, I guess it was like early 90s or something. And when I first found out, I'm like, this is amazing. This is the answer to mixing, right? Is just have a sound. Never mind the rear channels, if you just have 3 speakers. But obviously that format meant extra hardware, as well as extra delivery formats, DVD audio or
just
or
a
something,
little
Blu-ray, right? So Atmos and what Apple's doing with spatial is really incredible. It's like you've got whatever it is, 3.3 billion phones on the planet, right? All capable of delivering Atmos or spatial audio through a headphone experience. And then that very, very same file, it can expand into something else depending upon your hardware setup. So
I finally learned, how to listen on my Apple AirPod Pros, and really hear the apples to apples comparison on an Apple of Atmos versus the stereo mix. And then the light bulb went off and it's like, oh, when you set it up right, you hear that difference. And then you can hear how an Atmos mix just makes the whole thing expand and breathe and stuff even in the AirPods. And then, of course, going out to NAMM and then being in AES in New York, there's, at AES, they had set up an Atom Audio Atmos room, and at NAMM, they had set up a PMC Atmos room, and both of them were like really well done setups. And then I heard examples of, great mixes being played back, and it was like, oh, wow, this sounds
right.
really
And remember that same great Atmos spatial audio immersive mix still works in stereo, right?
Yeah.
That's one of, the main keys here is that we're not asking people to go buy a separate, immersive sound player. We're not asking you to go buy special headphones or go spend X amount of dollars on 12 or 14 or 16 speakers for your home stereo, right? Because your significant other may not allow that, whatever it is, right? So that's one of the beauties is built into that one file format is multiple formats. And so if you don't want to, and that here we are, much of this industry gripes about two things: format, can somebody pick a format, right? And then dynamics. Everybody's tired of music getting compressed to death. Here's a format that says all we need is this one. And it can be dynamic, so much so that you have to make it dynamic, right? I mean, Apple says for the most part it's 18 dB of headroom. So everything that most of the people gripe about is answered in this format, but people are still reluctant to go there.
Well, I think people can be slow sometimes to make changes, but then, change can happen in a like the hockey stick chart. I mean, I don't know how far we have to go off or if this is off topic, but I mean, you've had enough experience to see technologies be slow to start and then be adopted. Do you think that we're experiencing some of that with the immersive stuff too?
I think so. I mean, I hope so, and I think so. And my, the A&R people, the label people that I speak to, they're all, the big rush to try to jump the shark, get in front of the line, whatever it is, that's over, okay? Yeah. But the fact that this is probably the best format, moving forward. Again, these typical, ADM master files can be usually are gigabytes in size. So if you had to download that to hear all of the time, then we could be shooting ourselves in the foot. But since we're just streaming it and there's so many different kinds of handshakes that happen to say, what are you listening on? What device? And it happens behind the scenes, right? I mean, if you're playing it on Apple Music and you have your headphone, it knows that you have Apple earbuds in or that you're, Bluetoothing to a set of speakers.
So therefore it's, this is fascinating to hear you get into the weeds on that too. So the file delivery system knows you got AirPods on, so we only need to send you this kind of file, and
the binaural
your connection is slow, so we can send you the one that's this size.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I think we as the industry learned. I mean, I used to tell a story. There was a wonderful reviewer for Stereophile, Michael Fremer, and I remember being over his house, and he had just gotten a new Marantz 5.1, receiver amplifier, whatever, and And here we are lying on his living room floor trying to figure out how to get this thing to pass signal from a DVD audio player.
And you guys weren't passing something back.
No. It was really hard to make those things work. So I think the industry took the time, Dolby especially, said, listen, let's figure this out before we reintroduce this to an audience.
Yeah.
And they definitely did. And Apple, took their rightful place and, changed the format a little bit to what they think is better and has their own twist on it, spatial audio. But, it's not a difference in mixing. It's really more a mastering level to be looked at. As far as mixing engineers are concerned, you mix to a format for Atmos and then we'll worry about whether or not, spatial audio is going to do something a little bit strange to that, but Tidal will play it fine. Although Tidal's now using spatial, so it's, so they're actually shifting to the Apple format, which is actually kind of better. I think, if you play to it as a codec, right? If you're playing to that, it can work.
So what do you have to say to the listeners out there who are thinking, how do I begin to try and experience this? And, are we all just, is headphones going to be basically our option, or do you want to encourage the rock stars to start considering any other versions of speakers to start assembling or anything like that?
Well, we do things where engineers, I encourage them, right? I mean, one of my engineers here, David, is, he's one of the young ones coming up, right? And he just completely dominated this Atmos thing. So David will get on a phone or a Zoom with you and talk you through setting it up, et cetera, putting the headphones on and just experiencing it, and even just getting to the point. I know one of the things he does is he just has them send through a stereo mix in just the left and the right channel to just make sure things are running right. And for that matter, if even as a format, if you said, this whole spatial audio thing, it's all a bunch of, Apple pushing a new format or something, well, then just mix to the left and the right speaker. Don't worry about anything else. At least there's a format that will handle stereo, right? You don't even have to use the 2.0 down mix if you don't. So just mix to your left and right speakers.
Native Instruments supercharges your music production with Complete 15, featuring Contact 8, new machine hardware integration, and cutting-edge synths, samples, and effects. Contact 8 now gives you the chords and phrases tool for instant inspiration, the Leap tool for dynamic looping, and Conflux, a hybrid instrument for blending organic and synth textures. Plus, Machine 3.0 is here, giving you seamless control over Native Instruments gear and the latest NKS-supported hardware. Use the code ROCK10 for 10% off at nativeinstruments.com. So you're describing the creator as a mixer, or are you describing the listener who's just sort of trying to say, I'd love to hear what this Atmos thing is all about?
Well, in this particular case, I'm thinking of the mixer. Right. The mixer that says, I don't know, I remember that 5.1. I bought a DVD audio player or whatever. I'm not going there. This is going to be dead in another year. Right. And so I say to them, okay, but if we can look at this format, because again, we're looking to try to get one resolution format, right? And everybody wants dynamic range. We love our music loud, but we also like it dynamic. Here's a format that allows dynamics to still play a part in this. And so I say, if that's your situation, you don't believe in it, then just mix to the left and the right channel, or let us put it in a left and right channel in an Atmos file.
Okay. All right. I think I follow you now. So you're saying if we're not ready to really dive into all the spatial locations of the Atmos format, and we're comfortable with stereo, we could still create a mix that has all the breathing room that we want, and all the dynamics and all the frequency spectrum or whatever that sounds hi-fi to us in left and right stereo, but print that into an Atmos delivery format so that it gets mastered and delivered that way, so that the service that plays it back for a consumer recognizes, oh, we got an Atmos, so it plays it as an Atmos with additional headroom and all that kind of stuff.
Right, and utilizes some kind of automated sound playback, volume control, which is better for the user. Right, the end user, right? I mean, we can all want to make our records as loud as possible, and I've been down that road myself, But in the end, it's about the end user. If they don't accept it, what are we doing? So in the end user's listening situation, it can be a better. And again, see, the thing too is that this is a new format, right? We're not talking about 1644 audio that was invented in 1977 or 79. The first CD came out. We're talking about something that's new, and Apple is updating their codecs, almost on a weekly basis. There's always something we're here. Wait a second, that changed a little. It's not drastic, but just enough, and it's almost always for a better. And then they're working with Dolby, as well. And we just got to hook up with Dolby, and we're just trying to work with them on, on the fold down aspects. And, how can maybe that become metadata so that we can change how that fold down works. It's not just a strict -1, -2, -3 dB on the fold downs, but maybe it could be a +1 or a +2 dB on a fold down, So that's what I'm saying. It's brand new, and I think it makes sense to adopt it.
Well, one of the comments you made in there was liking to make things louder, and I think it just reminds me to maybe clarify for the rock stars the difference between us as the mixer and master trying to turn it up now in before we deliver it for the listener versus delivering something that has that headroom in it so that the listener themselves can turn it up at the volume. Right. And, it's the same difference. Sometimes if we're ever struggling to understand what that means, it's the same difference between cranking everything up so that it's redlining in your DAW and just sounds terrible, and now you can't turn up your volume on your your speaker volume because it's sounds so bad.
Yeah.
Versus learning, what if I turn the speakers way up and then I start bringing up all my faders? Now I've got all this extra headroom and it can breathe more.
Yeah, and I think we took the volume wars as far as we could take it,
right.
and I was happy when Apple came out with their ADM master, and they were like, listen, you got to have some headroom in there. And, I was the first to start bringing it down, but then there were many other people that didn't, and still just started slamming it because it's a marketing device. It's not just your art. It's not just your music. So there's a balance now in there, but for all those people that complain about dynamics, it's like, here you go. Here's a format. Let's do it.
Yeah. Well, so maybe describe a little bit what your speaker setup is in there for you to be able to master on Atmos and immersive. And what does it even mean to master an immersive format? And how is that different from mastering a stereo format?
Yeah. I mean, there is some, talk going on, like what does mastering for Atmos really mean, right? Or for immersive, for spatial, I mean. Mm-hmm. In many cases right now, what it means is, the mixer is working in a set of headphones, right? And, maybe a 5.1 setup, but what does that do in a 12.1 setup or a 12, or a 7.1.4, what happens when it does get into that other format? So it is more of a QC check on how does this handle across all of, we have a Sonos sound bar and mm-hmm. And with a sub. And so we have lots of systems that we've checked things on and we're learning about it as well. So I think there's a lot of that. There are some tools available for adjustment, but it's not as much that we're worried about overall volume. Although we're doing a record right now for, a typical mixer that loves to load up that 2-bus compressor, right? And that's his mix. So you can't ignore that. You can't say, but now we're going to make the dynamic version. I mean, that would be an artistic choice and could be an option. But we had to do a lot more compression and actually some limiting to get it to still have that kind of body. But the reality is if you stack that up against something with dynamics and it plays that back with volume normalization, it does sound smaller. It really doesn't, it doesn't have that same impact. So I think that we might have to be working with that with mix engineers, right? Is to learn how to, I know that worked for your stereo, but let's see, maybe lighten up some of that attack time, maybe, and give us a little bit more, headroom before you're hitting that limiter or something.
So that takes me straight to a question. One of the, two questions. One is, we have a great Spotify, or just add as a Spotify playlist in the show notes. of many of the records that Alan's worked on, and they're totally awesome. And you should definitely please click through and go check that out, Rockstars. Give them a listen. But I don't think I put together an Atmos playlist for
we'll have
you
to
yet.
do that, yeah.
So we'll do that, and we'll include that in the show notes too. But one of the artists that immediately came to mind is I think it's pronounced like Zuzu or
Zuzu, yeah.
Zuzu.
Jamie, yeah.
Yeah,
Sure.
very, very cool stuff. Like the music you're working on is great, dude. I mean, this happens to me sometimes when I get ready for these podcast interviews.
Right.
I do my homework aspect, and then sometimes I just get stuck in the listening. I was just sitting there like listening through all these records you did.
Well, that's kind of
that one has there's a particular song, Common Loon, that's got like a really distinct pumping compression to it.
Yeah.
And so when you were talking about the compression and stereo and Atmos, is that sort of related to what you're talking about? Because that was a very artistic choice for sure.
Yeah, I believe that was John Congleton mixing too. So, I mean, superstar mixer, John's stuff just sounds awesome. And I'll have to say that some early stuff that we've done within the industry a few years ago when we were experimenting with Atmos, we were trying to create something different than the stereo representation intent, right? And that's when the artists were just kind of rejecting it because, they listen to the Atmos fold down in headphones and versus their stereo mix done by, an awesome mixing engineer. And in that particular case, it was I mastered the record too. And they were like, Alan, you and John, you nailed the stereo. It's right there. The Atmos it doesn't feel the same,
And they're probably listening without the level match or something, or no?
It was, again, we were thinking of the Atmos as more, hey, people are going to be buying a lot of speakers, right? And that's going to happen. Or it's going to be like the 12-inch dance mix was in the late 80s, early 90s, where it's more of a specialty, marketing item, so let's have fun with it, which is kind of what we did with 5.1 in the, early noughts, was that we were pulling the mix out and letting the person get inside the mix a little bit more. Whereas I think now the approach is to say, don't at all ignore the stereo mix, follow that intent and try to match it a bit, and maybe pull some things out that were buried and put them into a different location so that when you get the fold down, it's the same stereo mix. And matter of fact, we probably spend, I'd have to say at least 25, if not 33% of our time while mixing from stems, which is a little offshoot there. We'll get to that probably. Mixing from stems and mastering, comparing that Atmos to the stereo and putting headphones on and saying, okay, how is that working? How is the Atmos fold down holding up against the 2-track, the actual 2 mix, the stereo mix? And that's important because, again, it's not at this point, these releases aren't just for the art's sake. They're your marketing tool, right? It's a band's marketing tool. It's their PR department. It's got to go out there and represent them. And if somebody has, Atmos always as their option in their settings on their portable device, and so it's going to pull up that Atmos mix, which is not at all representative of what the intent was of the mixing, then the artist is going to lose. So you have to pay attention to that,
Yeah. Well, I mean, something that comes to mind, which I hadn't considered before, is imagining we're in a movie theater listening and the music's coming on, because a movie theater setting kind of makes sense to all of us. Like, we're used to sitting in a theater and there's speakers everywhere. And in a movie, there's a lot of reasons why the voices are up front and the sound effects go into different locations. But with immersive music, we now have this option to create music that also takes advantage of that three-dimensional space. But perhaps there are some times where artistically, a punk rock band's, mix comes on, and artistically it makes sense for it to represent something that sounds stereo up in front of you instead of trying to be everywhere all at once. And is that sort of related at all to what you're talking about also?
Yeah, I mean, we're doing we're doing some stuff for Dee Dee Ramone's estate that are taking a lot of his old and some unreleased stuff, and we're mixing it in Atmos as well. And yeah, absolutely. It's that is more just about taking a stereo and making it wider. Maybe adding some of these overdub tracks into the back channels. I mean, there were some things and there were a lot of bad Atmos mixes. A year ago, 18 months ago.
There were a lot of bad stereo.
There were a lot of bad.
There were probably a lot of bad mono mixes, but none of us remember that, right?
Yeah. So I mean, you've got to you work with the production team, see what works, and then there are some artists that are embracing it wholeheartedly that are just saying like, we're going to do it as a completely different release.
Yeah.
I mean, now we do get separate ISRCs for the Atmos versus having the same ones, which is what it was about a year ago. So, you can actually claim it as something else. In some cases, the artist even is saying, we do a lot of work where I'm trying to get the indie world into this. And so we'll do like a really super discounted, single Atmos mix. I mean, like just, crazy, stupid. Hey, listen, just buy us a 6-pack of beer and we'll do this for you. That's and some of these artists are very, creative. And they're like, there's a part I have in there that's, would really be great if we could put that in the rear channels and have the reverb in the front, And so I'm starting to see people embrace it, and say, oh no, this is cool. This is going to start working. And then I think that's just going to catch up with everybody. There are a couple engineers that I do a lot of mastering for, and I wouldn't go as far as to say that they're Luddites, but they're not believers yet, that they're just not there. And that's when I say, well, then listen, let's just adopt the format and we'll put it in left and right, but it's going to catch up on them. I think a lot of them are I was talking to, I guess I could say Ross Robinson, a very famous, heavy music producer, and he's got his own label, and we were doing a project we mastered it for. At the end, I said, Ross, you got to let us do the Atmos for this, and he was just like, I don't know, it's just, that's, I don't think it's a thing yet, and I'm like, well, come on, just let us, again, I'm giving them the offer of our lifetime here, and he's like, and he kind of was very honest. He was, honestly, Alan, I don't understand it, and so then I kind of explained to him how it's a really important part of marketing now, especially if you're looking for Apple, right? And if you're looking to grab super fans, give them something extra, this is sometimes what they're looking for. And now, I've seen a lot of records now coming out on Spotify, even though Spotify doesn't adopt Atmos or spatial audio, you can export a 2-channel binaural version and put it on Spotify. So that
I haven't heard that.
Yeah, you can find a couple. Look for a spatial audio or binaural, releases, and obviously I think it's one of the DSPs charges an extra $27 per Atmos mix. So it is kind of all right. You're gonna have to spend another couple $100 to get your full album up this way. So. But there are artists that are embracing it, and labels too, so.
Have you seen anybody doing podcasts in immersive yet?
Maybe
I keep wondering about that. I mean, where would I put your voice and where would I put my voice?
The light bulb goes off above my head here. This is great.
Oh, no, that actually gives me an idea. So basically, the Atmos version of this would be that everybody listening would actually hear the buzzing overhead lights right above us right now.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
They'd hear the train in the distance sounding like it was in the distance.
Well, again, I mean, even with what happened, the TV world adopted 5.1, right? And so, and it became a standard. And, everybody's complaining the commercials are too loud, this, that, the other, jump from show to show. So even if you were watching an interview show, the Charlie Rose show, the dialogue, the voice should have been coming from the center channel. And that's it. It was just a given. And there you go. And now, here we are, 2 decades later since they adopted that. And now it's a lot smoother, all the transitions. And the film world has adopted it too, right? Like at least 5.1, if not Atmos coming. So there, and then it's about the end user's experience. I'm not here trying to say that everybody's mix should have guitar solos spinning in circles, but it's like, it's a format that can handle multiple different kinds of speaker systems, binaural for headphones. And again, it's the user's choice. It's the artist's choice. It's not where you fill up all the channels.
Mm-hmm.
You can just say, you know what, I really just want left and right. Okay, put it in left and right.
It's just another creative format. It's the same thing, like just because you have endless tracks in a Pro Tools session or whatever, doesn't mean you have to use endless tracks in your song production. Right. Just because you have a shaker doesn't mean the shaker has to play all the way through the entire song,
Right. And you have to, it is true that it's when you experience it in, a real environment that's tuned for it, it is more convincing, right?
Yeah.
We used to play with 5.1, we used to play the album Refused, Shape of Punk to Come in 5.1. And, you don't have to sit in the center of the room. You could be sitting anywhere in the room, and suddenly what was an amazing album is even more amazing. And it's just more, as they say the word, immersive. You completely can get into the album a lot deeper.
At iZotope, mixing just got even smarter. Introducing the new iZotope Catalyst series, Plasma, Aurora, and Cascadia, designed to transform your sound with intelligent processing for dynamically precise saturation, reverb, and delay. Plus, Neutron now features 3 new modules and an upgraded AI-powered mix assistant to help you get killer mixes with ease. Use the secret code ROCK10 to get 10% off the Catalyst series, Neutron, RX, or any of iZotope's incredible plugins at iZotope.com. One of the things we did on the last interview is you talked about preparing mixes for mastering. And in fact, you shared a great metadata mastering sheet with us, which we've had. Right. We've had up on a link on our website, and we'll have that in the show notes as well, Rockstars. And a lot of people have downloaded it. How has that changed for you now that you either with stereo or with Atmos stuff?
Well, since we're on Atmos for a second, every major label, in their request from their mixers, asked for stems and have been for, it's 15 years or so, something like that. The producer and engineering wing, right, of the recording arts put out a whole thing. George Massenberg put this thing. You got to flatten your files, folks, because, hopefully these records you're working on are going to, last years into the future. So let's future-proof everything. You might not have that plugin. Who knows what DAW you're working on? Take all your files and flatten them. And, sure enough, here we are 15 years later. People are trying to open these, we're doing a 20th anniversary tour. We want to open up that session. Nope, can't open it up, right?
Yeah.
So, there is wisdom in that, in like exporting those files, those stems, those individual, flattening your files. The drag about it is that used to take a long time, right? And so many of the top mixing engineers would have their assistants overnight just exporting all these stems. Now, with newer versions of, I think, most of the DAWs, you can do multiple outputs at the same time, multiple bus outputs. And if your template is set up properly, you can probably, in an expedited fashion, even or in real time, if you're using, a hybrid setup, you can in real time export 14 stems. And it's not taking that much long. Again, as I said, I've had many people, we're doing a very popular post-punk emo band, in a similar scenario. They just went out on their reunion tour, and the label wants Atmos, who went back to the original mixer. They're on 2-inch tape. We did the transfers, and and
they got their Van sneakers that put them out of the closet.
But the mixer was just like, this is just going to take too long. You're not going to pay me enough money to do this, So now just kind of, again, future-proofing your production, right, is like export those stems, just, a dozen stems, stereo drums, stereo main instruments, whatever they are, lead vocal, even though it's probably mono without the effects, print it as a stereo export, vocal effects, lead vocal effects, background vocal effects, harmony vocal effects, and again, if you had to sit there in real time and bounce out 20 stems, that's chewing up studio time. That's, you're maybe paying an assistant, if not yourself, I could see where that's a barrier. But the DAWs are getting hip to it, and they're saying we've got to build this in. This is the future. So now if you set your template up right as you're mixing, maybe you have to do 2-3 passes because maybe, I've got that, plate reverb is coming back and I'm sharing it on a couple of tracks. So maybe I need to, whatever that is. So again, we use that word future-proof around here a lot, is that if you're working on a project, do this. We used to say vocal up, vocal down, instrumental, a cappella, right? Have those main mixes. So now you're adding a few more to it.
Yeah, I mean, even my band, which never quite had any career mindset at all, is dealing with the future-proofing issues. I've had to open old sessions. All it takes is to just get older. That's really it. I mean, it's you don't even have to be somebody famous or trying to, and you yourself, you said work with lots of indie bands. But like in our case, it might even be as simple as all we ever made was a physical CD. Now we want to release it digitally as a re-release. How the hell do we even get back to those mixes and stuff like that?
Right.
So there's lots of levels of future-proofing.
Well, we get called by labels and artists all the time. Alan, do you have, because, well, the only thing we have is a scratched CD or something, and we even got caught in it. We had an old AIT backup system, which stood for Advanced Intelligent Tape, right? It was built for banks to overnight back up their spreadsheets or whatever.
Right.
And many people in the audio and the video world latched on, and we could do these bulk, 10 gigabyte backups overnight and store it on a tape.
I remember those. They looked like DAT tapes, basically, right?
Well, they looked like, like the DA88. That tape kind of format, right? It had a little chip on it so that the directory was stored on the chip and at the beginning of the tape, and then it rewrote the directory. A lot of great future-proofing built into it. But what they didn't future-proof was how does that hardware tape device hook up to today's contemporary computers? And so, we've got a share of several older, Mac 2, Mac Towers, G3s, whatever, that still interface with them. But those tapes are tape, and they don't hold up well 20 years later. So the data on them, is hard to retrieve. Yeah.
So, that's worth commenting on because, Steve Albini, for example, would have said at some point to me, analog is actually a really great archival format. And then you hear these, these mixed descriptions of tape. But I think it's important maybe for us to understand, and perhaps you can clarify this, Alan, that like the analog audio tapes are more robust and actually can be a good archival format and be recovered, whereas a digital, tape is usually pretty cheap and flimsy and it's just a 1 and a 0 that gets lost.
Well, I mean, there are, analog tape does have, a shelf half-life, right? So, you could put on a 2-inch reel from 30 years ago and it may have more print through. It may have lost some high-frequency energy.
Yeah.
I mean, we bake them and, transfer them. But at least you can get at the material. You can get at the data, right? With D88s, ADATs, DAT tapes. Gosh, I mean, is anybody not fearful of putting a DAT tape into a DAT machine these days?
I'm terrified if I put it in. And my DAT machine actually stopped working, so I don't have to worry about it anymore.
Right. Well, here, like, I'm the only one in the facility, whatever, we got 6-7 people, It's like, no, I'll do the DAT transfers. That's fine, because, you put that in there, it eats it up, it's gone,
So when you do a DAT transfer, do you actually, have the lid off the machine the whole time so you can see the tape being threaded? And I mean, does it get that intense?
No, I mean, I guess a few years ago we bought some, new old stock, machines, a Sony machine and a Panasonic 3800. Is it 3800? Not 30.
Really? You didn't get the Tascam DA30?
We do. We have a DA30. We have a DA45, but those machines stopped working.
Yeah.
So the DA45 was the 24-bit version, which everybody was believing in and loving, but try and find a working DA45 right now, so. See, it's important. I mean, as an engineer, right? We're talking to a lot of engineers, a lot of studio geeks that, you've got to really make sure that this stuff can be retrieved at some point. I mean, you mentioned Sufjan Stevens' record, it's coming up 20 years, we're going to be doing Atmos for that, and, where are those original multi-tracks, and, a safe bet if somebody has a successful record might not be a bad idea to lay off tracks to a two-inch machine. If you have a record that went gold or something, and you want to make sure you can always archive it, even if it's more than 24 tracks, just do multiple passes. Yeah. It's just, you gotta, this is your catalog. This is what's worth money. You see these huge sales of catalog pieces that are, going. I mean, I think Queen is $1 billion, I think is their catalog that they're selling. Pink Floyd, 400 million, 500 million, something like that,
Wow.
But you have to have the multi-tracks, right? I mean, or the I mean, I guess they're buying the publishing and the masters, but, so.
That's fascinating. Yeah. So one of the thoughts that popped into my head was, you're referencing how it's much easier now to print those stems and stuff inside your DAW. And certainly in Pro Tools, we have committing tracks. And I've thought about that before, where I was like, I don't have the time to do that on these no budget indie things. So how do I do that? And then one day I was like, screw it. Let me just select everything and just say commit and come back later and press play and see if it looked like it worked. Yeah. And mostly I was like, that worked,
Right.
Like without even thinking about it, you can just select every track and do the commit thing. And at least you've printed it, It's
Right.
like, even if it's not a perfect exact mix, it's a lot better than I can't open this session.
Right. And we're not talking about opening it 20 years from now, right? We're talking 4 years, 5 years
Right.
in some cases, right? And again, there were reasons, when hard drives were thousands of dollars, right? For, I still have a 600 megabyte
Wow.
hard drive. That was my first external hard drive that I was using.
That was like, no, we don't have to use floppies anymore.
Right, exactly. But that was $4,700 for 600, less than the capacity of a CDR. Less than the capacity of a CDR, $4,700,
Wow.
And so,
And that's $4,700
back then.
Old school
Right, yeah.
dollars.
So now, you can get a 2 terabyte hard, SSD drive for under $100, probably like $80. So that, again, there's no really good, sensible reason why not to have multiple backups of things. It's like, I don't want the drummer to have copies because he might remix it. Give the drummer a copy. Maybe he's got a house and he's got a safe spot for it.
Yeah. Shoot, what was I going to just ask you next? Well, we got lots more stuff to talk about, but this was the part of the question that I was getting to too. I think about Pro Tools, but you work with a lot of indie artists. So the question I wanted to ask was, do you find that a lot of the people you work with when they're indie aren't using Pro Tools and they're using much more like, prosumer? Well, that's the wrong word. Just alternate DAWs or DAWs that are less expensive and,
Right.
because they don't care about, using the industry standard or any of that stuff.
Well, we have a lot of those as well. Like we're pretty well versed in Logic as well.
Yeah.
We're using Pro Tools as our main, software, as our DAW, even though we're exporting, in a different way. We're ingesting through external converters, different A to D, D to A. It's really, again, because we're dealing with indie artists, there's a lot of stuff we have to do to try to make the record as great as it can be.
Yeah.
And, some of the stricter mastering programs just are a lot harder to do those things, to line up an extra track, we finally got the overdub from that guy out on the West Coast. He sent it over. Can we add that on? Yeah.
You mean like a Wave Lab or something would be considered a mastering
right.
DAW, but
Right, or
Pro Tools,
Sequoia or,
right.
or any of those.
Yeah.
So it's really a matter of how much work you need to do. And, and I adopted Pro Tools way back, and just said, listen, I'm not competing with Sterling. That's not what we do. We're working for the indie artist.
Yeah.
And
you're making the cool records.
Well, we're making the first records, right? Like, we're in there with our, sleeves rolled up, and we're saying, what do we got to do? There was,
I didn't mean that as a diss on
but
Sterling.
no,
they're making cool records.
Oh, absolutely. No, it's a different service,
Yeah.
There's a record, Down by Law. This Dave Smalley was the singer, came up for the mastering, and it was a pre-Total Recall in a Pro Tools environment, right? And his vocals were buried, and and we tried, mid-side, the whole thing, and it's just not working. But the vocals were low, and the record had to be delivered the next day to the label. And so I said, how's your voice? And he was like, what do you mean? I said, let's just double your voice. And I, gave the in a sense, the magic wand over to my assistant. I said, we set up a vocal mic, and he literally went in and doubled all of his vocals so that
at the mastering stage.
In the mastering control room.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I mean, it's not the place to do it, but it was what we needed to do,
Yeah, it's cool. I mean, I did I remember hearing a master that Richard Dodd had done once. And it was a situation where an artist I knew did something that was kind of cool to hear somebody do, which was take a song and go around and try it like 5 different mastering engineers, because he was looking. And of course, as a producer, as a mixer myself, we're dying of curiosity. Like, what does it sound like?
Right.
So, and then Richard did something really cool, which is he sort of irreverently just said like, this thing needs to sound more like it was on old tape, and threw a slap echo on it and all this stuff, and it sounded really badass. And I was like, that's so great. I love seeing bold, creative moves when people make them because they just care about the music, and that just seems like it hits them as the thing to do,
Right. Well, I mean, and that is, you have to be used to willing to go to that length, and it's not that other more prestigious mastering facilities wouldn't do that. It's just they're not set up for it, and as well as a budget, perhaps, is that, I mean, it could cost a few $1,000s to double your voices, where here it was just a couple $100 maybe, And I probably just said to Dave, I was just like, just do it. I'm going to go, I'll come back in the morning. Let's see what you guys got,
Yeah.
And that's the indie credo. It's not just me, right? That's pretty much any indie artist, any indie engineer, you're trying to get to raise your stakes in the industry. You'll go to the nth degree. What do I got to do? Just say yes all the time. Yeah, let's do it.
So can you think of something in the Atmos realm, in the immersive realm that you've been working on that just got you really, really excited? A project or music? Anything come to mind, or something that just really took advantage of all that space? We just did the Hadestown, the Broadway cast album. I actually did the original cast album, and I'd been working with the production team for about a decade, even before it hit Broadway. They did a live cast album in London, and and I just pressed them, and I was like, "We got to do this in Atmos," and they were all excited about it, and that really, it was a live cast album. It wasn't, the original cast recording perfectly done, and every lead singer is in their own little booth or something. They were wearing, headpiece microphones. No Melodyne on this one.
No, actually, there were little bits here or there where we did actually tweak a thing or two. But in that particular case, again, the mixing engineer Todd Sikafus, who's just brilliant. He's amazing. He was just he was like, I don't know, Alan, I'm very, very I love my mixes, and I'm like, let's just see, And he even said something to the effect of, I'm just listening in earbuds, and I think these are better than the stereo mixes,
Cool.
So, but again, it was appropriate for that product, right? It was meant to be a live recording. It's got lots of dynamics, and you definitely get the sense, of like anywhere in a room. You don't have to just be in that center seat. You could be most of the way in the front, and you hear the rear channel. That's really, I guess, one of the misnomers is that everybody thinks you need, or not everybody, a lot of people think you need to be in that center position, and not giving enough credit for our brain and our ears. localization, the way that we localize sounds from around our space is really remarkable, And so we can hear things, you can be by the front left speaker and you can still hear the rear, right speaker, and notice things more. And there's also, if you want to do something startling, right? I mean, I know there was an old trick, an old post guy told me, he's like, startling sounds are from the rear. That's just what makes us jump. If you put it in the front speakers, it's not as startling. So if you have a little overdub that you want to jump into a section, it's more effective in the rear, And
do you have, does the door to your control room, is it behind you?
No, it's not. Actually, it's to the side.
It's sort of a classic control room setup is the doors, because you're always trying to take advantage of a nice, full
symmetrical
wall.
Yeah.
Symmetrical. So it's very often that the entrance to the control room is behind you. And I can't tell you the number of times, and I hope everybody listening can understand this, that you have headphones on. Usually it's with headphones,
right?
For me, because I'm so isolated. And then I hear something and it just freaks me the fuck out.
Yeah.
I think someone's, who just walked in? What was that? Was there a ghost in the studio?
But that again just shows how in tune our hearing is. And, let's play into that fear factor, right? Like if you have something, that you want to sound kind of creepy, it's probably more effective in a rear space than a front space. And when you get to that Atmos or the binaural or the spatial audio kind of experience in headphones, it actually sounds pretty real that it's coming from someplace behind you,
Yeah. I've also noticed that I think it's because of training my ears for so long, I've become very acutely aware of spatialization, and I actually hear things in the wrong places sometimes. And I realize, I'm actually hearing the sound come from over there and echo off of this. And I can tell, or something. It's, I like to think it's that versus, like, I'm losing my right ear or something.
Something's going wrong inside.
It's interesting to notice stuff like that. And I feel like I really notice it when I'm trying to go to sleep and I hear like, what's that sound over there? So
Right.
It's a good point you make about just that, like, being hyper aware.
Yeah. And it just separates things. And again, for those mixes that are very concentrated on that stereo bus compression, you can still have that, and I think, those engineers that rely upon them, like this one particular engineer, this record we're doing right now, he's an old school guy and he just loves that stereo compression. And the first masters that we did, and again, we were dealing with stems from him, about a dozen stems. And, we left it a little bit more dynamic, and he was just like, nah, it just doesn't have the same feel. The artist actually liked it, but we took it a little bit further, compressed it a bit more, but still left it wider stereo and was able to pull some elements out to make it a little bit more interesting. But when you compare it to the stereo mix, it's hard to tell the difference,
Are you ready to launch your career in the audio or entertainment business? SAE Institute Nashville, right here in the heart of Music Row, offers hands-on programs to prepare you for the industry. From studio production and live sound to audio for film and a whole lot more. You'll learn by doing, working with professional-grade gear alongside experienced industry pros. If you're more into the business side of entertainment, SAE's Entertainment Business Program teaches essential basics like contracts and promotion to help you navigate the industry. With diploma, associate, or bachelor's degrees, there's a path for everyone. Plus, Career Services supports graduates as they take the next step. Want to see it for yourself? Immerse yourself in Nashville's exciting music scene and book a tour today at nashville.sae.edu or call 615-244-5848. Howdy, Rockstars. We're back now for the jam session, aka the second half of the show. And my guest today is Alan Douches, joining us here on Recording Studio Rockstars. Alan, are you ready to jam?
Yeah, let's do it. I've got refilled on my caffeine. We're good.
I love it, dude. Well, so now at this stage of the show, I mean, I didn't get to spend much time talking about artists that you work with in bands. There's a lot of really, really cool stuff in your playlist. And And I do know we went there some last time too, but one of the comments I would make is that you really get a chance because of the fact that you work with these indie artists and stuff. Indie, it's like in the same aspect that we've talked about Atmos opening up dynamic range, indie music opens up dynamic range in creative possibilities too, I think. And you have a lot of records that are like really cool, kind of like speed punk records, cool metal records, cool art rock records where you're like, man, I wish I could go see this, bizarre art installation happening.
Yeah.
And so it's very exciting that you get to do all that kind of music.
I think that's, part of the thing that I embraced, and again, whatever it was 18 years ago when we moved out of the New York City area, I just loved working on cool stuff. If I had to do the same genre every day, I would probably not like my job, and so, I kind of dig it. And in the same day, I can work on 3-4 different, completely different, genres of music.
Yeah.
And that's enjoyable, right? It just keeps you fresh.
Did you ever go down the production mixing path? I mean, we probably talked about that on the last show.
Well, that's how I got into this. Was I was producing records for Caroline Records, which was a pretty big indie label back in the late 90s, mid 90s. I guess was like about 96. I really started, and they were putting out about 500 records a year as an indie label, and and there was a band, the Whirling Dervishes. I produced them, I recorded it, and it went off to mastering, and it came back, and it was horrible, and so I was just like, well, wait a second, I can do better than that, and we don't have to go down that story, but
no, but that's the classic. I mean, that's the story. It's almost a trope in the business of the band member who goes into the studio, they record, and then the recording of their band comes back, and they're like, "This doesn't sound right to me. I should learn how to do this." It's funny to hear the same version of that applied to mastering.
Well, and it wasn't that the person did a bad. It just wasn't paying attention to it. And at that time, it was one step removed from just sending it right to a glass master. Just somebody kind of like was doing their thing and just didn't realize that he was making it worse,
Right.
So that's really where that started. So yeah, I mean, and I think that has always been an attribute, like when I said to, Dave Small, yeah, let's just double your voice. And he was kind of shocked, like, really? There was another record we did where we took the rough mix. Fortunately, it was done in a DAW, so it was possible. It took a rough mix and a master and, a fully, finished master and just mixed them together, and like,
nice.
And that's what the master was. It was a common, and I've probably done that at least a dozen times, if not maybe 40. I don't know. Let's just try it, And I don't know that if you come up through the ranks of one of the more prestigious mastering studios, if that's, even an option. Like, oh my gosh, we can't do that, or at least maybe they weren't prepared for it. I remember, and some of those guys are pretty good friends of mine, Greg Calby specifically, he used to do mastering when I was mixing,
Mm-hmm.
and I remember doing a crossfade on an album you needed 3 half-inch machines, and it took, I think, about 2 hours and probably cost another $1,000,
Yeah.
It's but that was before, really couldn't do it on the 1630, this is just what was necessary, and so I think it just opened my mind to be able to say whatever's possible. And that's where I embraced Pro Tools, right? Because Sonic Solutions, which was the de facto mastering program back there. And I even met with the guys at an AS show, and they were like, I was like, all right, everybody tells me I should be using Sonic. Tell me why. Oh, well, please, come on. You can't be serious, are you? And I'm like, why? Well, he said, well, first off, you can't do this kind of fade, and I'm like, yes, you can. He's like, no, you can't. And so I walked him over to the Avid or Digidesign booth. I went over to one of the guys. I said, can I show this guy something? And I showed it. And he was like, when have they been able to do that? And again, not to diss Sonic, that what they do was very exacting. But what I needed was way more creative tools, and I had to deal with that. So I'm not dissing them at all. Their product was probably a finer product for absolute pure mastering. But, we were resurrecting the Misfits catalog. This stuff is rude. So it needed a lot of help.
That's great. I love it.
And there wasn't money for it, right? That's the other thing. It's like it wasn't like we had, I think I won't get into. Yeah, it was just a bargain. So.
Yeah. I mean, I think many of us or all of us are familiar with that. I mean,
yeah, exactly.
If you, at some point, maybe it's in the beginning, maybe it's all the way through, you're bending over backwards to just make records. I mean, the first records I've made, I remember, the guys were in 5 hours away in a different city in St. Louis. I lived in Nashville, and they'd say, "We've got access to a studio this weekend.
Right.
We can pay you $50," and that would cover my gas to drive there, work all weekend, get no sleep, and then come home. So I didn't make any money at all.
Right. But
I was just so excited to do it.
That's why we do it, right? Yeah. I mean, and it's not that. I mean, at some point, it has to become, a business for you, or you have to provide yourself with a living. And normally, if you're good enough, it does happen, right? I mean, that's just the capitalist business world we live in. If you're talented and if you can provide the service for people, they're willing to pay you.
So this brings to mind actually a tangential topic. So for me, as an independent music producer and podcast producer and doing all the things that I do, I also tried to keep my eye on other opportunities that would come along that could be helpful for, supporting myself. And one of them was to discover years ago that there was this new thing that came along called Bitcoin, and blockchain and Ethereum and these interesting things that were fascinating to me. And so I started paying attention to them, and they can be a way to, participate in something that could be helpful for a music maker's income, for example. That's just what got me interested in it. But my point is, I got really interested in that. And then when I noticed that you, in your bio, said, a blockchain Web3, I'm just like, my ears perk up. I'm like, what? I want to know all about this. So I'm excited to hear what that is that you're doing and learn more about it.
Sure. Well, we're working on procuring the right trademarks and stuff. So we'll put a link in the podcast when this is actually available to all your listeners. But I've been sitting around, listening to indie musicians, gripe and complain and all this kind of stuff for, a couple decades now. And so when I started learning about what a blockchain could do, I realized this is an answer, right? This is the answer. And I've met some pretty important people, Bob Young, who was part of Red Hat, which became Linux, and some of these older guys that were designing the internet way back, and they're like, this is not what we wanted it to be. This is very, very far from the level playing field that it was designed for. Yeah. And a lot of those guys started looking at open source and blockchain and transparency and decentralized utilities, and said, this is really the way. And so we started talking to some of them, and sure enough, got to talking to this person, to that person, and then we got our startup capital, and we started producing products. Yeah, that's
wild. All right, well, so maybe we should introduce the Rockstars to a little bit to what this stuff is, because obviously I led with a word everybody's heard, which is Bitcoin, which is got its own slew of whatever questions or comments or maybe the comment sections in this video will start blowing up because I said that word. But let's leave that behind for a minute. Let's just talk about what is blockchain. Why is that? To what level are you allowed to talk about this stuff that that you're launching now?
Without signing an NDA, right?
Right.
It's not really that as much as yeah, what we're doing I think is fairly unique, but the underlying technology is there for everyone to use. Right. Blockchain is a ledger that just keeps track of, authenticity and authorship, in a sense. There's
in a transparent way.
In a transparent, decentralized way, in
a trustworthy way. It's
right.
Like, right. There's an aspect to, it first appeared publicly with Bitcoin, and it became this simple, I don't know if simple is the right word, but essentially kind of simple system for allowing everybody to interconnect and be able to send something and verify it and say, you now have the rights to this number, this code that's visible on the internet. And so that kind of thing sounds like what you're talking about is that can apply to a lot more than something like Bitcoin.
Again, it's, I think it's best said by, I think Janet Yellen and Jamie Dimon have both said, blockchain is a solution waiting for a problem, in a sense, right?
Right.
So, so look at an industry and say, what problems do you have, and it was very common in the music business to say, piracy, right? Or, ownership, copyright, all these things that, that come up and blockchain can be an answer for many of these. But the key factor, I think, is that the artist really needs to be at their own control center of this, rather than, and listen, I always say, if you want to, sign your brand away to a major label because they're giving you lots of digits of an advance or to buy your name or whatever it is, great, do it, but if you don't want to do that, and or if you're not in that position, then you should be in control of how your art, your creation is monetized. And a really popular example of one of the aspects of our utility is, as a studio owner, you do a service for somebody, you send them an invoice, they pay you Venmo or PayPal, it happens in 10 or 15 seconds, and it gets transfers in your bank, and we're done. Why do artists have to wait 9 months, if not longer, to get paid for their streaming? Why is this not happening within seconds after somebody streams a song? Granted, it could be a micro payment, but that's what's one of the beautiful things about, the internet, is the speed of computers now allows this to happen. You should be able to be paid immediately after a song. And again, we're not trying to be exclusive. We're trying to be open source and say, you want to be on Spotify? Sure, it's all about discovery, exactly. But who is doing the pushing of what you're discovering? Is it really an algorithm in Spotify, or is it maybe somebody paying Spotify or an owner of Spotify that wants to push this artist or that artist? And, all these, links to, fan-based, marketing, where is that really the fan? Who's paying whom, and what is the fan being rewarded? All of these things kind of converge together, pun intended with the band, love Converge. It kind of comes together and says, can't the artist be at the center of their own world? Why can't they really control this and allow them? A very, popular thing to do is just to say, I want to release my music as an NFT, right? And everybody
that everybody maybe got familiar with that 3-4 years ago when it was all the rage,
right?
Around 2020. Well,
2020.
It was 2020,
2021. Yeah. And the concept of it was great. I think we were just a little ahead of the time then. There weren't enough NFT players available to do that. But that number is increasing. And the other key factor here is that I believe the latest statistic is 40% of music streamed on Spotify is indie artists now. So pretty soon, the majority of the music that's going to be streamed on the most popular streaming site, not necessarily the best sounding, but it could be independent music, and many of these artists aren't really receiving any kind of payment for it, either in, fandom or in money, right? The monies that you receive are horrible. So, the artist should be at the control, unless I truly mean this. If somebody comes along and says, you're the next best artist to ever hit the airwaves, we want to give you whatever, $1 million, 10 million, 50 million, whatever, go. This is not trying to knock those services. When a major label gets behind an artist and does their thing, it's kind of pretty awesome, right? But it shouldn't come at the cost of the indie artist, right? That's what really what we're professing here.
Rock your music production with the updated Complete 15 bundle from Native Instruments, featuring Contact 8 and expanded hardware integration. Whether you're crafting cinematic scores, EDM bangers, or experimental soundscapes, Complete 15 gives you industry-leading synths, sampled instruments, and creative effects to bring your ideas to life. Contact 8 introduces powerful new tools like chords and phrases for instant inspiration, the Leap tool for dynamic looping, and Conflux, a hybrid instrument blending organic and synth textures in real time. And with Machine 3 now available, you'll enjoy even tighter integration with Machine Plus and the latest NKS-supported hardware from brands like Akai, Korg, and Novation. Plus, Complete 15 features revamped Massive X, Guitar Rig 7 Pro, and Isotope 11, helping you shape, mix, and master with ease. Use the code ROCK10 for 10% off at nativeinstruments.com. So is it fair to ask you how, to give us a little bit of an introduction to how something like this can work and again, what is it that we're talking about? We're talking about an independent artist releasing music through streaming platforms of their choice, but somehow integrating with what you're building and with blockchain such that an income can flow immediately back to the artist.
Right. And the income can be generated from, subscriptions, and it doesn't have to be, a monthly subscription. It can just be like Patreon, pay what you want. There are several artists. One very good friend of ours, Amanda Palmer, is amazing Patreon artist. She doesn't care about what's going on the main streaming services. Although, her music is there. She's not saying don't go there, but her true fans, follow her on her own Patreon. But Patreon is kind of limited because it's still in Web 2. In Web 3, we get into a lot of aspects of, an artist being able to control how they're reciprocating fans, how their art is shared. Is there a limited edition? Do you reward people for that? Do you have, in a sense, a QR code that allows you to go backstage? There's all these different scenarios that can come within these smart contracts built into the blockchain.
Yeah.
And, and you're right. We try to not use that NFT word because it really kind of had a bad connotation because people were trying to do these exclusive drops, right? Oh, this, we're only doing 100 NFTs and they're going to be worth, and most of the people in the industry were just driving that up. It's really more about how we utilize the technology to allow an indie artist to control their art and their fans and how they, how they work together.
Okay. Let's keep going with that. So the NFT thing essentially said, you could purchase or you could own something digitally, and then you could have a copy that was verified as you owned that copy of it. But then, and then of course it was traded on a speculative market. So of course that got people both interested and turned off as things like that do.
Right.
But I think fundamentally the thought was, in the same way that you could buy, a unique copy of a vinyl record, people hope that you would use an NFT to buy a unique copy of an audio file of a song. And then somebody comes along and say, well, I can just make a copy of that. Why is that? You bought a unique copy of that picture. I just took a photo of it. I've got a copy of the picture on my phone. And so I think that ultimately kind of missed the point a little bit, or missed the mark, right? So, but the thing you're bringing up is there's another aspect, which is that by saying that you owned a unique copy of something, essentially you're saying I acquired the key that unlocks the right to something, and you're referring to the way that these keys can unlock the rights to other things, like saying, hey, this demonstrates that I'm a member of a VIP group, or this demonstrates that I have the key that lets me join you at the backstage event at your show, and so it does empower. It's like a whatever you can think of version of offering some, extra level of merch and access and stuff
Right.
like that as an artist to your fans.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, and like you can take it, in a physical world, like you're saying, like we're allowed backstage. What about a key to allow your super fans into the studio, but only
Right.
done through VR, and you have to have the NFT in your digital wallet that allows your selected top 10 fans to sit in during the recording sessions.
Yeah.
Now, some people may not want to do that. I mean, I'm pulling one example out of what could be thousands.
Right. Luckily, we don't have to make up the examples. The artists
No,
get to make up the examples.
and that's the key. That really is the key here. Again, 47% of the marketplace is indie music. So but I think it winds up being like 8% of financially what the marketplace makes. Let's turn that around, right? Why if your video, if you do a video and you put it up on YouTube, why does the artist only make 20% of that and Google makes 80%?
So let's stay on that for a minute. So the idea of posting what you've created on these free platforms, essentially, how can the stuff that you're working on help connect that back to an artist generating some sort of income? What aspect, since it's already there, and I think that's the kind of question people have. They might scratch their head and think, well, wait a minute, if I'm listening to a song and it's already on Spotify, how does that connect somehow back to the independent artist? Is that because this future technology will integrate with those streaming platforms in a new way that it doesn't yet?
And or have your own streaming platforms. Why doesn't an artist
Right.
have their own streaming platform? Right. I mean, we both have, young adults in the entertainment world, in a sense, right? That buy product. My daughter buys vinyl all the time, right? All this stuff. But what if you could, also add something to that gave fan incentives, that gave, longevity to your working, your belief in this artist, and maybe even financing them, right? I mean, you can take a lot, like I said, a lot of what blockchain is bringing isn't, earth shattering, right? But we've had GoFundMe, we've had Patreon, we have the devices, but there's other people pulling the controls,
right?
And there's also very limited security to it. So, we're trying to open this up. I don't know if you're familiar with a DAO, a decentralized autonomous organization, but we're really setting this up. The parent corporation is a DAO, so that this is not about me and my progression. This is really about, can we make this truly a level playing field for artists? And how many fans do you really need to be a full-time musician? If you're a major label, if you don't keep churning out these, 10 million, watched TikToks or something, you're dropped immediately. I mean, I work on these projects all the time with bands. They're like, oh yeah, I know, I got signed to so-and-so, and then I couldn't do another TikTok with 50 million streams, so I got dropped or whatever. Is that really what people want? I mean, I think that if you had 1,000 fans paying $10 a month, you're making $10,000 a month as an artist. Can a couple people in a band survive on that? Sure. That's 1,000, at $10. As long as you as the artist, and this is, like I said, Amanda Palmer is brilliant at this, and she's very fair. You got to work it. You can't, this is not, she works.
It won't build itself. You're going to have to do the work. Yeah.
But
the beauty is, like, I mean, trying to create worlds where the artist, when they put in all that work, I mean, as music makers, as producers, mixers, mastering engineers, we're very familiar with putting in lots, like a lifetime's worth of work into something.
Right.
And we're probably also familiar with sometimes feeling like the reward doesn't reflect the effort that was put in, Right. And sure, there's topics about, like, well, did you give the people what they want, and all that kind of stuff. But the truth is, a lot of the times, we did give people what they want. We did work on stuff that connected. We added a great deal of value to the creative world and music community and all that. And so trying to design systems that will, fairly reflect that back to people on a, an equitable kind of fashion, I think is very exciting. And I think we off camera had mentioned the word Ethereum, which is a platform that's similar to, it's a blockchain platform that's a fundamental layer that allows building of other things on top. So I don't know, are you guys working on a layer 2 solution
Yes.
on top of Ethereum?
Yeah. I mean, and, the thing about it is that there's, again, we were talking about like, even spatial audio and Atmos, it's just this is new, right? It's changing. The app that we built, 3 years ago is outdated, and it was built strongly around that NFT concept, but not as the product, but more as the utility of storing the smart contracts, et cetera, and so forth. But now there's a whole bunch happening, and by the time this podcast come out, there will be a lot more. Yeah. And I think that's what we're trying to embrace here, is to say there surely is a unique item that you can promote and sell and be part of as both the artist and the fan. Ethereum is just very friendly to us. They're just, they're open. Whereas, and Bitcoin is not supposed to be. That's the kind of the concept behind Bitcoin. It's a very closed,
it seems to be doing
place.
what it does best.
Yeah,
which
exactly.
is, be a form of whatever you want to call it.
Right.
Because this isn't a Bitcoin show, so we don't have to get out too far.
Yeah,
but Ethereum, what's fascinating about it, and one of the things I've always enjoyed about following that is that I get a sense of a real there's a real element of DIY community around it, which is really cool. That feels familiar in the way that indie music and communities and touring as an indie band feels, and all that stuff. So it's exciting to think about projects coming along that would open doors for music and creatives. So let me say something back to you that I think that maybe you were hinting at. And my idea wheels start turning when we talk about this stuff.
Right.
So if we're familiar with a streaming platform and we think, oh, people just have uploaded their music, what are you going to do? Everything's sort of free and streaming there, and there's endless access to things. Then you go to the next idea, which is, but there's also things like Patreon, which are these places where as an artist or a creator, you could live on the big wide open free platform, but you could also have like next level stuff that's interesting on the Patreon platform. I could do that as a podcast. I could create one of my own where people join it, and we have a membership group, and I probably should have done that long ago, but it's a chance to create something that's just more special and more fun and enjoyable. But then that itself is already like a hosted third-party platform where it's like, oh, you got to go through the thing and then take a cut and all that kind of stuff. And there's, you don't really have autonomous control over your own content.
Right.
And there's issues that can crop up. And so then the next level of thinking to go to is this idea of, oh, well, what if this new technology, this blockchain technology can allow us to create our own containers to, actually, let me back up. I think the next level of thinking for me was, oh, how can this blockchain stuff allow a Spotify, for example, since we already used that word, to now host our, blockchain protected stuff over there. But I don't know that that's really the right way to think about it. I think it's a little more like, that ship has already sailed. So how can we create new environments where we, without having to go through anybody else's permission, I guess that's a way to think about it too. We can host our own creations. Our fans can join it without permission as well. They can do things like, you could be a member of something and you could turn around and later and say, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm going to go sell it to somebody else, like selling a used CD. And then, it still lives on, stuff like that. And you mentioned, why can't I should let you talk.
No, it's okay. No, it's actually, it is about getting other ideas, and there's two that I like to bring up. If you ever sat in an attended session with me, and many bands would say, "Hey, Alan, could you play this for so and so label or whatever? We're really great, we're awesome." And I had a little catchphrase I would say to them, and I've been saying this for a long, long time, which is, listen, you got to be able to do 10 shows in 6 months, and at the end of your 6 months, you got to be able to reliably draw 100 people to a show, right? If you can do that, then there's a good chance a label can look at you, right? And the artists are always like, "Oh, we can do that." And I'm like, right. 6 months, 10 shows,
check in with you in 6 months.
Yeah, let's really see this. And as you probably know, that's not easy to do for a startup band. You can get 100 people to a show pretty easily, but ask them to do it reliably, after 10 shows in 6 months.
In the same city?
Well, anywhere, really. It's just that's what a booking agent wants to know, because listen, after all, it's capitalism, right?
Yeah.
So, but how do you know if that's true? It's kind of like botting, right? Counts on Spotify. Didn't everybody buy streams? At some point, whether you believe they were real or not, didn't everybody do this? Are the major labels still doing this? Who do we know is popular? How do you truly discover what's coming up and hot? And it has to do with transparency, right? It's decentralized.
And as a listener experience, I go there every once in a while, and I'm like, and I try and click on the suggested things, and I'm like, occasionally it's okay, and a lot of times it's like, this is not what I was looking for at all.
It's like end capping in a record store used to be, right? You used to go into a record store, and before you knew it, or if you were just a consumer, you didn't realize that the record company was paying to have product placement, either at the cash register, at the end of that rack, on the wall, whatever that was, even a poster. That wall space was worth something, right?
Yeah.
So now just take that into the digital world, but also give it transparency, right? Who's recommending this discovery, right? Oh, this is coming from, oh, I assume my buddy is on this. Well, I'm going to believe my buddy that's the one that, he's recommending this to me. And it's that kind of transparency that I think will drive both the fans and the indie artists to say, because most indie artists, are we really shooting for the golden ring still? Like, everybody wanted that major record deal so that you'd get that big push and that you could retire by the time you were 30. I don't work with artists like that anymore. They love music and they want to make money at it, but nobody's really thinking they're going to be the next Pink Floyd or Taylor Swift or something. That's just way too much of a dream to try to believe in. So if you give it transparency, you're allowing it to be real. And I think there's more fan and artist interaction that can happen that way.
iZotope is truly amazing for mixing and mastering your music. Check out the new iZotope Catalyst series featuring Plasma, Aurora, and Cascadia. Powerful tools designed to supercharge your mixes with intelligent processing. These innovative plugins give you dynamic control over saturation, reverb, and delay, effortlessly enhancing excitement and clarity. And now Neutron introduces new modules like Clipper, Density, and Phase, completing your flexible, fully equipped mixing suite. Plus, the new AI-powered Mix Assistant helps you create a custom signal chain for your audio, referencing professional instrument profiles or your own examples, with easy macro controls to dial in a perfect mix. Use the coupon code ROCK10 to get 10% off Plasma, Ozone, Neutron, RX, or any of the fantastic plugins at iZotope.com. Well, one of the things that you mentioned was, why not let the artists, why can't you go stream it directly from the artist? And so a thought that popped into my head is, well, that would be cool. But when you're listening to that artist and then you want to go listen to somebody else, now you sort of, do you lose that one place to hear everything? And so my next thought was, well, not really. You probably just make a new platform where people create their,
That's where we're going, right?
That's cool. So you're making, good. I'm thinking about it right.
Well, I'm saying, if the underpinning of the organization is a DAO, is decentralized unto itself, then you just truly let the analytics grow, right? If something is truly busting and it has, all those, genre kind of things that you're loving, then that's a very legit, and you can see where those recommendations are coming from. You see where those fans are really, listening to something. The other side that's really interesting to this is, again, getting back to smart contracts is many times I've had a lot of people, think like, wow, Alan must be making a lot of money on that Sufjan record or Dillinger Escape Plan or whatever. Like, even if he only had a half a point, right? Mastering engineers don't make residuals. We're a service. Here we are, But what if you did want to give a mastering engineer credit on your songs, right?
Yeah.
And what if it was only 0.001%? What if you wanted to give it to the art person? What if you wanted to give it to your fans? Would your fans spread your music because they own part of it?
That's a fascinating thought, and I've thought about that stuff too. It's like, what if there's incentive to not in a weird kind of way, but in a natural kind of way,
transparent,
share the music that you love with your friends? What if it just makes sense?
I mean, it's just logical that you want to hear what your friends, your community are into and share with that. You don't have to agree with it, but there is a certain kind of effect that happens with that. And then also, if you are helping an artist become successful, then maybe that if it is stored on something that is transferable, be it a coin or an NFT or something like that, then that can have value. Just because a band puts their music up as an NFT doesn't necessarily mean it's going to have value, but it could down the road. So you can, and the other side is sharing it further on. If it's what's an old Rubber Soul record going for these days? I don't know, $5,000, an original London pressing or something, right? How much does Paul McCartney make on that sale?
Right.
Shouldn't he receive something on that, or is that double taxation because he got his, dime off of it back in the 60s,
I don't know. That's a tough one because probably anybody listening is like, wait, Paul McCartney's not getting enough.
Well, I mean, it's more just the theory of it is that can anyone resell a CD to somebody else can enjoy it, or CD, vinyl, anything, there are all these, there's nothing really new in this technology. It's just really the accessibility to it, right? Like I said, it's like, I do not understand this, why it takes so long to get royalty payments. It's just out of control for these artists.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't get enough royalty payments to know.
Well, nor do I, but I hear the artists and complaining about it all the time, and so the technology is there, and like I said, we see it every day between Zelle or PayPal or Venmo. We see this money moving around in seconds as well. It should.
I'll cite an example, a personal example. So there's a album I did early in my career with an artist who I really love, and when I got started on it, I said, hey, could I do a point on this record? And they agreed to it, and I just actually never followed through with it. Right. It was a total indie thing, and I just didn't think anything of it. And then I just thought, I'm not going to worry about it because it was so. It didn't really represent anything significant at the time. And also, in order to follow through with it, it meant I'd probably have to go hire my lawyer and come up with a contract and do a whole thing.
Right.
And then the other part of it too is, in my experience, when I have done deals and points on records and stuff like that, they haven't actually translated into a check showing up in the mail. Whether it's, it's very classic for a record to just simply never recoup. And you never actually get the payment, even though it's been out there for, ages and ages and has a life and probably has recouped, because there's no transparency. And I, remember having discussions with one of my mentors, and I would say like, well, how did you get paid for those royalties on records you did? And he'd say, he kept careful track, and he'd have to go walk into the office and plunk down a big stack of spreadsheets and look here, I see that you've done this and you owe me this much. And then they'd, you'd have to fight for it and then he'd get it. And I was like, wow, that sounds like an awful lot of work. And so the idea of systems where it's all integrated. Now, granted, in the same way that an artist is going to have to, nothing is totally, I mean, you always have to put in some effort into something. But
absolutely, yeah.
But having a system where, even a small thing that you did at the beginning of your career and you worked with an indie artist, and in my case, that artist has gone on to be quite successful and doing all kinds of things. So there's a good chance that there would have been some money for me. But if it had been connected to something like that, then, and the technology survives, then maybe you just, look and it's like, oh, there it is ready and waiting for you. And you didn't have to think about it too hard later.
Well, I mean, like I said, it is actually a safer mechanism for finance than what we have with fiat, with our normal dollars, right? I mean, it's just not fully implemented yet, but it will, and it's again, our incentive, especially in being a DAO, is that, we're not trying to benefit from this. We're not trying to, become, the saviors of this as much as the technology is there. It's just really about spreading the word. And we have a phrase where we say we're doing it from the bottom up, that rather than going to, these major mega artists, we're going to the absolute bottom, because those are the ones with the fans that are rabid, that will be there, that will ingest this process,
Now, are you familiar with some of the music projects that have previously tried to do something on the blockchain?
Yeah, I mean, again, a lot of it has to do with expense, and what's happening is it's getting more and more affordable, right? I mean, just like making records, right? In the 70s, Atlantic Records put up whatever, $250,000 for Led Zeppelin to go into a studio, and they want their 85% of the royalties from those mechanical sales. Sure, of course, you put up all the money, And I think we were really wrecked with that initially with a lot of technology, new tech, which is that it was just really expensive. There is a patent pending process that we are working on that is ecologically completely green, and that's what will change this. So as technology is developing to allow this to be extremely affordable, then the powers to be don't have to break in those kinds of numbers. And I'm sure Spotify and Apple put up these huge servers, developed this technology that they're using. Again, not taking it away from them, but from the bottom up, looking at indie artists, their system does not work for indie artists.
Right.
And indie artists have their fans. There's an easy way to tap into this. And again, you can sell out. No one is saying, sign here, we own you, lock, stock, and barrel. It's like, no, it's completely transparent. If you want to later make that choice, great. My belief is that you won't, because you'll see what they'll do to you, and you'll see how much better you can do on your own. It is really on your own.
Well, it's pretty exciting stuff. I mean, I've been following this for a long time, and I had had Music Coin when it appeared, and I even posted some of the early episodes of this podcast over there just to see what happened. And then there was another one called Peer Tracks, and I actually did an interview with the founders of that. Even before that. And so it was fascinating for me to think about how this would apply to the independent music industry and, creators in general.
And we really didn't touch upon AI, but, AI is enabling a lot of this,
Big time.
In a way that, like, you don't have to pay. These blockchain programming guys, they are rock stars. They are programming rock stars, $500, $800 an hour, and they, because of the security that is required to do this. And this is not, just, creating an API or something. These guys, they sit down and they just write code, and you want to be secure. But, again, AI is very helpful. You still need these high level guys making sure it's right, but they don't need a team of 20 people now. Now they need 2 or 3, and letting AI do the easy work.
Some of the heavy lifting.
The heavy lifting.
Yeah. So I just was on a long drive, and I've been trying to, it's funny, you mentioned Linux earlier. I've been trying to learn more about all this stuff, about Ethereum and about Linux and about different platforms, command line, the terminal on Mac. I was always scared.
Yeah.
People would say, Mac is just a Unix-based system. Like, what the hell is that,
Yeah, right.
And so I've been fascinated by it, but it's all just been, buzzwords to me. As
right.
that, and that's the way it is when we learn stuff without some focus or lining things up and really understanding it. It's just like we're collecting all these bits and pieces, like landing in a new country and trying to learn the language without studying it. And so on the drive, I finally pulled the trigger and I got ChatGPT, the app on the phone. And I was like, I'm having a conversation with this thing while I'm driving. And I got it to explain to me how Linux works, how command line works, what kind of software you install for Ethereum applications, and what a client is and what a container is, and what ports are that are internal and external, and all this stuff. And I was fascinated by that. And granted, in that context, I'm aware that when you talk to AI, it'll tell you, here's the right answer. And then you say, are you sure that's the right answer? Say, you're absolutely right. I'm sorry. That's not the right answer.
It just changed. Yeah.
So you have to be aware of that, but by simply repeating, asking questions, you really can get the right information on stuff.
Right.
And it makes a lot of sense that it understands code, because that's what it's made out of.
Right. And I mean, when people ask me about AI in music, I kind of use the analogy like in the 90s, everybody was running to drum machines, right? There's no need for a drummer, right? And what you need is a drummer to then program your drum machine, right? And then, we got through with that, and then we're finally like, a drummer is actually faster or better, right? Or whatever. And genre difference. Some genres want a drum machine, want loops, want something, but it didn't replace drummers. Drummers are just as happy now as they were in the 80s, I suppose, So it's the same thing with AI. We've got to get past a period of time. We got to get. I mean, there are some scary things about it, but I think we'll have some good control over it. There is going to be some regulation coming through, and we're keeping track of that too. And it's going to just be a lot more solid. And like I said, copyright is just is just waiting to happen on a blockchain. It's just Congress is pretty busy doing a lot of other stuff, whatever it is they're doing. But, it has to go through at some point,
Yeah. Are you recording your own music or other people's music in your studio, but you're having trouble figuring out how to get your mixes to sound great? Do they sound weak and distant or lack punch and clarity? Well, I've got a gift for you to help you take your mixes from sounding like basement demos to sounding a lot more like professional mixes. And it's my free course called Mix Master Bundle. This course will show you how to get pro-sounding mixes from your home studio with free and stock plugins in Pro Tools. And the best part is, these mixing techniques will work for you in any DAW, whether you're in Logic, Cubase, PreSonus Studio One, Reaper, or anything you can think of. Are you ready to make your best record ever? Then go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started for free now, and you can find the clickable link in the show notes of this episode. That's exciting. It's funny that you just brought that up. I mean, Alan, you and I are like birds of a feather, because I've been going around saying, AI music is just drum machine 2.0,
It learns on what exists, and, hence why, the imaginative artist has nothing to worry about, really. I mean, maybe they're worried that AI will steal it, but then again, see, blockchain has a solution for that. If you put up and it's original and it's stored on a blockchain, it's there. And AI can actually help you find other copies of that on Web 2 and Web 3. And be able to tell somebody to take it down or sue them or whatever. I don't know that lawsuits are the way to go, but
and hopefully to that point too, because that does speak to the functionality of the existing digital music system and the music system and traditional marketplaces, which is this idea that a market exists because it is well policed, it's well structured and policed, versus what's beautiful about blockchain technology is it exists because you simply have the right key to unlock something. So then when I think about streaming music and how do we music go back and forth through the internet using blockchain? And instead of thinking, well, why are they going to use your version when they get the free version over here? I think we have to remember that the reason we go to places to get a version of it is because it's just, as a consumer, is because it's a better experience and it's more convenient and it's more familiar to us and it sounds better and it works better and it looks better. And perhaps unlicensed places will manage to do that. I don't know, but I suspect that creating an environment where everybody flocks to the place where you can post your music, post your art, interact with your fans, the fans can interact with it, and everything works pretty, seamlessly and great, it will become a better experience,
Right. And, the key underlying factor here is two. One is that the artist should be able to choose that. If an artist says, I will only allow you to hear my music if you own an NFT, right? That's their choice.
Right.
However, you could say, listen, I'm going to give you these extra experiences if you have the NFT with the smart contract. And you can at the same time say, yeah, and I'm going to let those other enterprises play this, because after all, you still want to get your music out there. And then the beauty of the smart contract is also that it can change. Like you can give away part of it now and then let it scale down on a sliding scale as things get more popular. You don't want to give away 10% of your song when it's making, $10 million. Maybe you do. And why not let that be the way that you can finance things,
So Rockstars, just to clarify a couple of things, when we use the term smart contract, we're talking about actually little digital code. It may not be so little always, but digital code that is embedded into the blockchain that is a contract, but it's all just digital functionality that might say things like, when somebody plays your music, the register of that having been played, or the token that's part of that system that goes to the artist automatically gets split and goes out to all these account holders, these wallets, and those could be all the people that helped make that record and put it out there, and they could get complex one day but complex in a way that you don't have to think about, just like using our computers is that now. But it could be something where every single person who ever participated in this thing, all the way up to the current date, benefits.
Exactly.
And it just goes into this contract and it functions. And, and then if they somehow perform badly, then they're removed from the contract. All these things are possible, which is fascinating,
The way that I look at it is the system is broken right now. I mean, Spotify and Apple, Amazon Music,
I don't see anybody out there raving about it much. I mostly see people complaining about it.
And 100,000 songs a day are uploaded. How do you discover, right? How do you, right? I mean, and we're just mindlessly pouring ourselves into these programs, right? We're betting again. And once that indie field grows, and it is growing, it's not going the other way, right? So I believe the latest statistic is 47%. So once it hits that 50% or more, now you've got the majority. And if the majority say, we're not going to play on Spotify, we're not going to play on Apple, we have our own player with our own discovery, and we have our own influencers, and we have our own way of, getting royalty statements, immediately. I just, Cobalt Music was awesome. I don't know how familiar you were with that distribution.
I remember the name, but I don't know.
Yeah, they touched upon this. I followed them. A lot of what we're doing, was generated from some of the kind of concepts that they had, where as an artist started doing well, here's the analytical tools. Maybe we'll jump in and we'll help finance you. Right? Because again, there's that. 6 months, 10 shows, 100 people, right? I remember I remember, doing a production deal with a band, manager brought me down in the Pine Barrens in New Jersey to a firehouse, and there was nobody there.
Were you sleeping in the Pine Barrens?
No, yeah. We have my weapon storage. And out of the woods came 300 kids, to see this band perform, and the manager turned to me and said, so what do you think? And I'm like, what's to think? You just had 300 kids storm a stage at a firehouse in Nowheresville, New Jersey. No offense to New Jersey. I grew up there, so but that was, a very tangible moment, right? I mean, there was no botting. There was no anything, it was transparent. 300 kids showed up. But, when you get back to it, the artist has to do something. The lead singer would spend days making paper airplanes that when he got on stage, he would just throw them all out to the audience. And everybody, was clamoring to get a paper airplane that had a piece of his artwork on it.
Nice.
It works both ways. The artist has to give something back to those fans, right? It's part of the system. It's just we've got to create the that momentum with the indie market. And
that's cool. It's exciting stuff. And I know it's all still a little bit,
it is new. Yeah.
Mist floating in the air as we imagine what's possible. But what's exciting about it is that it's happening and it's moving forward, and it's happening at this fundamental build-up level. And especially when you discuss things like Ethereum, that's always been a community with a long vision.
Yeah, very open source.
Long roadmap for developing so that it creates something that, all these layer 2 concepts like what you're talking about could be built on it, and things can really have longevity and grow. And, it's sort of like Internet 3.0.
Yeah, because it is daunting, to try to do something absolutely, completely on your own.
Right.
That's left to the Googles and the Apples of the world in a sense. But we've seen what they do. And as much as, we use their products, there's certain aspects that we love about them, still their self-interest is number one, right? And so we're just really, the underlying function here is that the artist should be in control how they want to do. And there can be advisors there. We're not telling people just sign on a dotted line and here's what it is. These things can be changed and altered as your career moves on, or not. It's up to the artist. It's really the artist should be in control, and transparently so to all their fans.
And for what it's worth, too, there's a real appreciation for freedom of speech in the Ethereum community, and freedom of expression. And these are things that are valuable to artists for sure.
And seeing who said it. How, do we believe anything these days on TikTok, on Facebook, on Instagram, on any of these X? Could be real. How do we know? There's no transparency. There's no transparency there.
Well, you use the firehouse analogy. So like, somebody gets up on stage and has, is free to express themselves musically. And the beauty of that is if you're standing there, who said it, know who just expressed themselves, and you can have a take on it.
Yeah.
And perhaps you can even go have a conversation face to face,
That's, it is about community, transparency. Yeah. Artists should be in, control of their destiny. And again, I really mean this, if somebody steps in and wants to, generate finances for you, pay your way, then that's your prerogative. That's what you should be.
You mean as far as going the traditional,
and it doesn't even
music marketing.
It could be on the deep side of that. It could be traditional, but it could even just be an investor. Like what do they get? How many investors have invested in small bands? What do they really expect out of GoFundMe?
So you're saying this new level of tech will actually help finance. Even keep that going on.
Yeah,
right.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure. And again, transparently. It's not a matter of, if somebody is, an investor, you're gonna know this band has an investor,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this is very cool, Alan. Wow, this is exciting, man. I didn't know we were going to get to talk about this stuff today. So thank you for letting us deep dive into that. And Rockstars, of course, we're on video now, so there should be comments below. Please jump in and, kick that like button. And if you enjoyed this, kick the kick the didn't like button if you didn't for some reason, and drop in comments and, ask us questions. If you think we got something right or got something wrong, let us know. Alan, before we go though, let me ask you this question. I love to ask this of all the guests on the show, and I've asked you this before, but it was years ago.
Okay.
So we're going to take the Wayback Studio machine again, and you get to go back in time and find younger Alan and say, listen, dude, here's the single most important thing you need to know to be a rock star of the studio yourself one day. What advice would you like to go back and give yourself? And would it be buy more Bitcoin? So somebody else just said that on the show too.
Well, I mean, there are parts of that. I think, it is about content is king, right? I mean, I think that again, new technology, DAWs, et cetera, are giving you tools that you don't have to save a fortune to go out and buy, right? You don't have to have a Studer tape machine. You can have the plugin. And maybe it's not the same, but it's irrelevant in this new world of imaginative artwork. I don't know if I said it last time, but this is something I do advise: is learn piano. I think anybody.
I think you did say that.
Did I say it last time?
Yeah.
Well, I've been saying it for years, so it doesn't surprise me.
Even the bot quoted you on that when I
did. It really? Okay. Well,
yeah.
Because it's true. So much information is and can be more easily entered into workstations, et cetera, and so forth. And how many times I've been in a studio where, somebody needs to record a part on a piano. We need a string part. We need a this or we need a that. I think it's a very relevant point. The other thing is, from a finance standpoint, start saving. I mean, I regret not having started a whole life policy. I remember when I was first engineering, one of my high school guys was in insurance. He was like, Alan, you got to do this $25 a month. I'm like, I don't have $25 a month. He's like, you gotta be able to pull 20. I don't have 20, but had I would be owning my own blockchain right now, Right. So try and put a little bit away and then also try and save for those things that you really want, right? I mean, like I have a C12 microphone because an opportunity came to me where somebody, wanted to sell it, but I have to sell it now, and you can't, if you don't have that credit or you don't have the availability to some quick cash. I think most of the time that's the way I've bought most of my gear, like my vintage stuff, my LA3s, my 1176, my C12. It's all because like somebody was getting rid of them. So, you've got to have some money for that. I mean, these are typical things. I don't know. I would say try to stay healthy, try to exercise.
Yeah.
Don't ignore those things because if you're actually, my best advice would probably be, trust your feelings, because it's a long road. And if you're going to be successful, it's going to be because you trusted your feelings, not because you copied somebody's template and you did this or you did that. If you can trust your feelings, after all, that's what this is about, right? It's all about working with people and opinions. So learn how to do that.
That's great, man. I love it. Trust your feelings. That's a good one to have.
Yeah. But it used to be pick a format and get to work was a big saying I had. But I think we've kind of sold that one. Everybody is. Pick a DAW. It doesn't matter. You don't have to be in Pro Tools. You can be in anything. It's, you don't have to have the C12,
It doesn't matter what you're using. Alan's going to put it in Pro Tools later anyway.
Yeah. Well, we're running through a lot of analog here. We didn't touch much about mastering, but that's okay because
well, we did. I think we talked about it some last time, and we'll talk about it more next time. Or Rockstars, tell us what you want us to talk about more next time.
Well, by then we'll have our app out, and we'll see. We'll start bringing some people
I'm fascinated, man.
Yeah, good.
What a treat to talk to you about that. And I hope it goes well, and I hope that
it's going to take time. That's what we all have to. Same thing with Atmos, right? I mean, a lot of the stuff we talked about is about new formats, new technology. Nobody's, going to jump in and just dominate it right away. I just, with the engineers that we're working with Atmos on, it's like, jump in, get your feet wet, try some stuff, and we're here to help you do that. That's what we want, because we want to see the format. So it's not about like us getting work, although, that is part of what we do, but it's about seeing this format survive. And the same thing for the blockchain. It really can be a future, but it's not one or two people. We've got to, get a mass movement going to adopt it.
Yeah. Right on, man. Well, Rockstars, thanks for... Oh, well, let me ask you this before we go. Where would you like the Rockstars to go find out more about you? Where can they connect with you? What if they're ready to master their next record, or they want to,
Yeah, everything is westwestsidemusic.com, right? Or our Instagram is West Westside Music. Everything kind of revolves out of that. Our other blockchain stuff all has a link there to follow along with that. So
groovy, man. Well, thanks for joining us today, Rockstars. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Bye.
Cheers, man. Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our awesome sponsors who help make this episode possible: Isotope, Native Instruments, Atom Audio, Stealth Chair, and SAE Institute Nashville. And remember to take advantage of our special coupon codes at isotope.com, nativeinstruments.com, or stealthchair.com. Use the coupon code ROCK10 for 10% off any plugin or chair purchase. If you enjoyed Recording Studio Rockstars, please check out our sponsors using the links in the show notes. These are all things I highly recommend for your studio. They're going to help you make your best record ever. And please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, because it's a great way to help support this show. And leave us a comment below to let us know what you thought of this interview or who we should have on as a guest in the future. I would also like to thank our fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars, Vlad Weselchenko and Liz Hulitskaya. Thanks so much for watching and listening, Rockstars, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.